Hi, welcome to the Fun and
Hi.
Harmony podcast. How are you, Pranidhi?
I'm good.
We're so happy you're here.
I'm happy to be here. Happy to speak with both of you.
You're having a little respite from the children?
Yes.
Respite?
She hates it. Harmony hates it when I in any way suggest different pronunciations. Oh my goodness, am I in trouble?
Say what's correct and incorrect.
Exactly. It's a social construct, pronunciation.
Yes, it is kind of.
Yeah, very much so.
I grew up in the States mostly, but I was born in India. But I still have like some words that I pronounce the way my parents pronounce them.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is, like, I don't know that I pronounce them differently than most people until somebody tells me. And the funniest, like, I have had some really funny instances where people have just been like, "What are you saying?" Like the word albeit. Like I always
albeit.
Right? Okay. Do you know how I used to pronounce this? Albeit.
And for a long enough time, people were thinking like, "Oh, she'll bite." Yeah, that's good. Go on.
What's it mean? Because that's how my parents said it. I'll bite,
Albeit.
And so I just albeit. But somebody corrected me, and I was like, "Oh, albeit." I see.
Yeah.
I only just learned, I think, last year that the scion of a family group is actually a scion.
Oh,
really?
Yeah, scion of a family group is like the child of a ancient, family tribe, but it's scion, and I'm like, oh, that's a horrible word.
We have funny words like that too. When I grew up, my mom always said coupon instead of coupon.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So I always have to think, how do I pronounce that word again? Because my whole life I just grew up saying coupon.
And avocado.
Yeah, or cauliflower.
Roller coaster.
Well, in Canada, so Harmony, are you originally from Canada?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So there's little differences between Canada and the States, and in India, right? The same thing. There's so many dialectical differences.
Yeah.
Things are pronounced so differently, and even my kids, they both have Sanskrit names.
Yeah.
But the way we say them at home is different than the way people pronounce them outside. And my daughter is from a young age has been really like linguistically, it sounds like snobby to say your kid is gifted, but like she's been really quick to pick up linguistic things. Like she talked really early. She really picks up vocabulary very well. And she knows the difference of how people outside pronounce her name and how we pronounce her name. Yeah. And now she has a little brother. And so it's really interesting to watch her kind of toggle between what she calls her brother, because she will pronounce his name one way at home, and then outside she'll pronounce it a different way. It's really interesting.
What's her name and what's his name?
So her full name is Savishi, which in Sanskrit means courage, but we call her Savi. And outside people call her Tavi.
Oh, Tavi.
Tavi.
Oh, Tavi.
Yeah. Tavi and Savi at home. And then her brother's name is Vihan. Vihaan. So at home we say Vihan, and outside people say Vihan.
Yeah.
There's very subtle differences, but it's really, she's only 4, but she picks up on these differences. It's really
and so she'll kind of go between the two.
Yeah, I can see her working that out in her head.
Yeah, it's like putting the emphasis on it, whether it's like a long A or a short A, right?
Exactly.
So you're pronouncing it with the correct
second syllable.
Yeah, the correct Sanskrit pronunciation.
Exactly. And this is what we're talking about in yoga often too, right? With Sanskrit. I think people can get pretty dogmatic sometimes about you must pronounce it the correct way. And yes, we want to put intention into pronouncing it correctly, but also words flow out of our mouths with the decades of conditioning that we've had. And so
even the difference between North and South India, like asana or asan. And who is correct at that point? Well, the Sanskritists in the South are obviously correct. they were not corrupted by the Mughal influence of
North,
of Persia.
Yeah. Where were you born?
I was going to say I'm from the north, so I've been doing it all wrong.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. No question. But actually, you're from Michigan. I was so excited to find that out.
I am from Michigan. Yes. So
what part of the hand are you from?
I'm from Metro Detroit area.
Yeah.
So we're in a podcast, so there's no point
you can't see the palm
hand,
right at the crux of the thumb. I was born in Pontiac.
Oh, yeah.
My whole family was there, and they were actually a lot of them were originally Jews, the Kaufmans, who moved there to help build the Detroit Tunnel. And they couldn't get a job in Detroit, so they had to change their name to Chapman, which sounded very British, and so they were doing that to get work, and I thought it was interesting. Those kind of parallels of what a group, what a tribe, what do people have to do to try and make their way in the new world, in this, especially an incredibly racist new world like America.
Yeah.
What brought your parents over from India to Michigan?
Opportunity. The classic immigrant story, which is, you leave the home country for the promise of a better life. I think back, and my life would have been very radically different if my parents hadn't moved here. I moved here when I was 6, and it was difficult for them at the beginning, for sure. They were, they were on a career path over there, and then to transplant your whole life and have to start over.
Yeah,
very difficult.
What were they doing in India before they moved?
Both in the professional fields. My dad is an engineer. My mom is a scientist, pharmaceutical scientist. And they came here and started from scratch. And this is some crazy stories, about how they handled the transition. Like my dad came first, and so my mom was there in India with both kids on her own.
Yeah,
she had some help from family and stuff like that, but still, on her own, and then flying us across the ocean on her own and setting us up, and then her finding work and dealing with all the cultural differences that immigrants have to deal with. Yeah.
Was she able to find the same kind of work?
Yes, they both are for the entirety of their careers have been working in their fields. And they're both nearing retirement now, which is it's a cool thing to think about, them transitioning into this whole new phase of their life. Yeah. I'm hoping that they're going to just take on like full-time grandparent status. They're already amazing grandparents, but I hope like once they retire, they just spend more and more time here.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. I'll hope for that for you too.
When my family moved from Michigan down to Louisiana, there are all sorts of issues for me personally, having very different culture, and also being a Jew, an invisible minority to those crackers. It's kind of obviously Jewish to some other people, but to those people down there, they didn't no idea, and there was all sorts of issues for me personally, trying to adjust to living in the South and being different, being culturally liberal, for example, was they called me Fishman as a nickname because I believed in evolution.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I was like, he's a weirdo, But I quickly found my social group, and one of the groups of people that I found, most respite with Marathi family living in Slidell, Louisiana, the Gopinaths, who are originally from Mumbai. So the brothers Sumanth and Shmin were my best friends, even though we had a lot of cultural issues that they would forgive. I was not civilized, and they kind of made allowances for that. But I loved being in their home. I loved eating their food, and I learned a lot about cooking from their mother, who was also my algebra teacher at school.
Oh, wow.
And it was sort of fascinating that we were friends because we were both interested in the classical arts. You know, I was interested in classical painting; they were interested in classical music. We formed a little band together, which was a kind of a weird Caribbean punk band, which is sort of bizarre, but we were kind of going in different directions, I think, because I was going more punk and they were going kind of more classical. And it was interesting to me to think about maybe cultural appropriation, which is something that you'd mentioned in your the questionnaire to me, because they're picking up
classical music.
Yeah, European 19th century
Bach, Brahms.
European norms.
Yeah.
And I was picking up a lot of, for me, very interesting details about Indian society that I took with me the rest of my life. And so we're kind of going in different directions. And I probably know a lot more about Patanjali than they do. They know a lot more about classical music.
This is really interesting. Right? Was that your first introduction to an Indian family?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so that was your first introduction to Indian culture.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a piece that I often think is missing in the cultural appropriation conversation, is that what you experienced is like an immersion into Indian culture, at least from my perspective. That's an immersion into Indian culture, perhaps Indian American culture, since they had immigrated to the States. But most immigrant families that I know do maintain quite a bit of Indian culture within the home. Mm-hmm. And yet often in the public context, when we're talking about cultural appropriation, what I see is not really talk about Indian culture. It's talk about Indian texts, Indian history, Indian philosophy, all these other things, which absolutely we need to talk about, and we need to make sure we're honoring the authenticity of yoga's roots. But I don't know, I feel like the term cultural appropriation is sort of a misnomer, because I know many, many people who are learned in the text, but who are not so steeped in Indian culture in the way that you got to be, with this family. And, because Indian culture is this, like, it's not just what's presented in yoga philosophy or the Bhagavad Gita or the sutras or whatever. Culture is as much, it's the lived experience of being an Indian person. And, and it has all its little intricacies, like any other culture does. Indians, want their kids to get into stable careers, and they want to marry them off, and they want to have a bunch of babies. That's what Indian people want for their families. That I can't, of course, not every Indian family, but the vast majority, yes, that's what they want.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that. It's not a good or bad, but this is part of Indian culture. The cooking, this is part of Indian culture, the clothes, the language. It's just a very rich culture. And I just feel that piece is missing in the conversation, because it doesn't mean that, I don't know. I feel like we're living in a society and a time right now where everyone is really afraid to do or say the wrong thing, or they're going to get just totally pounced on, canceled. Yeah. Yes, exactly. So you want to make sure you're not like appropriating anything, like my God, can't wear a sari. Like there was this whole scandal because the most recent Sex in the City. I don't know if you heard about this. Like the most recent, the reboot of Sex in the City.
Right.
She wore like a lehenga, and instead of calling it a lehenga, she called it a sari, and it was like this huge deal. And I was like, come on, people! Like, this is not cultural appropriation. Can we just calm down a little bit? Like, how wonderful that there was like a 30-minute episode, or however long it was, dedicated to showcasing some of the beautiful Indian clothes that come from our culture. Can we focus on that? And there were Indian people present in the episode, Indian actresses. It was not like just white people masquerading the beauty pageant, I thought it was actually done with a lot of respect. But afterward, there was so much backlash online, and it kind of rubbed me the wrong way. Like, what kind of a world are we living in? We just want to tear people down all the time.
Yeah. I think you bring up such a important point too, that I think, part of it's how we're focused, right? And if you're just focused on like what everyone's doing wrong, or on, being offended, you can be offended easily at everything.
Oh yeah. I mean, it goes back to the pronunciation thing we were talking about at the beginning, right? To pronounce something incorrectly, you can be really offended and be like, well, you didn't sit at home and practice your Sanskrit for long enough,
Yeah.
Or you can sort of be, appreciative of the fact that somebody is trying.
Yes. Yeah.
And if we are really honestly trying to change something, and I'm not saying all this and sort of negating discrimination and appropriation that does happen, sort of capitalizing on somebody else's culture and then calling it your own, or being very greedy about stuff. All that stuff does happen. But if we want to instill change, I think behavioral psychologists would agree the way to instill change is usually through positive reinforcement. It's not by saying you're a bad person,
Yeah.
And you didn't do it right.
Yeah.
We watched this last episode of Atlanta, and it was fascinating. One of the characters in the show, who is Nigerian American, took his handler, who was a white girl,
an English girl. They were in England,
and he took her to a Nigerian restaurant just to kind of, because he wanted
Nigerian food, and he heard there was a really good Nigerian
and the handler
restaurant.
was going to pay for everything. So, he took her there, and he went back there some indeterminate time later, and she had bought the restaurant, fired the owner, and opened up a Nigerian food truck on the street. And she was running the Nigerian food truck. And I think, that's an example of cultural appropriation.
That's appropriation. Yeah, definitely.
That was really good.
Yeah.
But
sad and good all at the same time.
Before we go too much further, we should introduce you, because we jumped right in, and I'm sorry. Yeah. And so please correct me.
In your podcast, I think.
I know.
We're like halfway in.
Yeah, that's right. With Eddie, for example. Yeah. So just please correct me if I mispronounce. Pranidhi Varshney is the founder of Yoga Shala West, a community-supported Ashtanga Yoga studio in West Los Angeles, if that's still correct. She's the mother to 2 children who she describes as courageous and wise little things. The thread that runs through all her work is the desire to build community and live from the heart. And I think that's just a lovely introduction. Is that all still current?
Yeah, that all still tracks. That feels true. Yeah.
I had a question for. Do you have something, Harmony?
Well, I wanted to hear about your parents, why they named you.
I have that on the question list. Oh, that's a good question. Let's start with that.
I never asked them why they named me that, but I have often asked them about the meaning of my name, and it's really interesting. Before I started practicing yoga, I understood the meaning of my name to be prayer, which is what my mom has always told me. And so that's just always what I knew. And then I started practicing yoga, studying a little bit more about the theory, and I came across the word pranidhana, and I was like, oh, yes, this is where my name comes from. Yeah. Surrender, devotion, which, I mean, really also prayer.
Yeah, totally.
It's not that different. Yeah. So now I understand that to be the origin, the root word.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Of my name. Yeah.
And so your parents wanted you to be an engineer.
They were praying
they wanted me to be a doctor.
A doctor, yeah, that's good.
They wanted me to be a doctor. Yeah. It was very traumatic for them when I chose not to be.
My friend Sumant was supposed to be an engineer, and he got an engineering degree at the University of Texas, and then finally escaped and became a professional musician, and is now a professor of music, University of Minnesota.
Oh, wow.
But his younger brother, Shamin, also got a chemical engineering degree, University of Texas. He is now a psychiatrist, and he is not the professional bass musician that he wanted to be, unfortunately, for him.
Maybe there's something about the younger sibling, because my younger sister is also she's a pharmacist now. She
works good girl.
In clinical pharmacy. So yes, she's very much a good girl in that way.
Yeah.
But you were in the arts, is that right? You had developed an interest there?
Yeah, I was sort of forging my own path from a young age, which, you know, going back to something I said earlier, I don't know if I would have been able to if we'd stayed in India, but we came here. So I had all these options available to me. And yes, I went into the arts. I used to sing, and then I went into acting and pursued both those things for some time. And then, you know, yoga crept into my life. And then I was at a crossroads and I chose the yoga.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that what brought you to LA? Were you like following a career path as an actress?
Following the sun and the ocean when I came to LA.
This is a bit different from Detroit, honestly.
Yeah. Well, and I was in Chicago after that. From Detroit, I went to Chicago. I stayed there for several years. And then I came to LA.
Were you in Second City in Chicago? Or were you looking at...
No, I went to school at Northwestern. And then I was working in the industry there for a couple of years after graduating, and I got cast in a touring show. And so I was touring, and then after the tour was over, I was like, I don't want to go back to Chicago. So then I came to LA.
What year were you in Chicago? What years?
I started my undergraduate in 2002, and I was there till 2006 at Northwestern, and then I moved to LA in 2009.
Yeah. Okay. I was there. I just finished school at the Art Institute of Chicago in 2001.
Okay.
My second go around, and then left just then.
So Midwest really holds a special place in my heart. I don't know if you feel the same way. Because I don't know, the people in the Midwest just so kind in my experience.
I found them incredibly racist, but that's fine.
Really?
No, that's good. Yeah.
Oh, they have big hearts. Come on.
No. My experience with Illinois is that I lived in like 10 different incredibly small towns that any hint, any sniff of difference was going to get you fucking killed, or at least made fun of.
Wow.
And my nose was too big, my hair was too curly, my thoughts were too liberal. It was an unending torrent of bigotry. Towards someone who's an invisible minority, who's not obviously brown or black, and that's the, like, when I look at a fucking map of Indiana and it's bright red, it's because it doesn't have Chicago in it. It's like, that's why it's bright red.
Well,
so the rest of Illinois is bright red as well, and it's So when
and in that way, I've had a very specific experience that I've been in mostly urban settings.
Right.
My whole life. It's just what I think.
Michigan is the same. Michigan is
urban divide.
Michigan is bright red without Detroit and without Ann Arbor, and so if you don't live in the city in the United States, good luck. Because if you weren't born there or raised there, if you look slightly different at all, they don't want you there. Is my experience.
Interesting.
That was your experience,
That's my experience.
I wonder if things have changed now. I have compassion in a different way than I did a couple years ago for my red friends.
My red friends.
This is a bad joke, but you're like your native friends.
No, I really, gosh, like how many people, how many podcasts out there going to talk about the red-blue divide? Like that's just like the thing to talk about these days, like how politically divided we are. But I've had this weird experience during COVID where my blinders have been taken off in terms of my progressive blinders have been taken off. I used to consider myself like on the progressive left. And then like COVID happened and I was like, whoa, like, maybe there's a lot here that I'm not seeing. And so I find myself, politically speaking, moving to the center and having much more compassion for my red friends. Yeah, I really do.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I think, so many of our conflicts, I think, can really be, I don't know, if we were just in dialogue rather than in conflict, or like rather than debating, we were trying to like listen and like feel each other's hearts and like understand sort of where people are in the world and like what their pain is or what their fear is. I feel like so much of people's opinions are being pushed forward because of fear or because of pain or because of, all these things. And and COVID was an interesting experience in that, we're all sort of in the same collective traumatic sort of events unfolding, right? And,
well, you would think, right? But I think the reality of a lot of people's experience was shaped by their political tribe, which is really interesting, and not just on the right, on the left as well.
Totally.
On the left, we like to say follow the science, but as the science is not static. Science evolves, and as the science evolves, my perception was that those on the left who were really committed, to being a particular way, were very reluctant to go ahead and move with the science as the science moved.
Yeah.
And there, I felt on the left too, a lot of leading from fear and anxiety.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not an anti-COVID person, but I do think that how we experienced the last 2 years was very much determined by the information that we got. And
filtered.
Different groups of people got different information.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
that's really
right,
bizarre,
Harmony,
right? When you could see that, like these people are getting this. Like, where are you getting this? I remember we would ask my mom that all the time. She'd send us this stuff and we're like, where are you getting this from? Like videos and like news articles and things that like look real, and you're like, this is completely like fabricated.
Well, and online, I think right? We can all
everyone can have an opinion.
Well, I was just going to say that if we think of it as the way that people behave, and is in a normative way, and you can take any group of people, say a group of punks in a flat in London or in a squat in London, or you take a group of yoga teachers living in bungalows in Gokulam, they will develop norms of behavior that you must obey or you will be cast out. In any group, in any situation, in any part of the world, you're not punk enough, or you're not authentically Ashtangi, or you're not true. You're not from Athens, Georgia. You're not from here. You're not behaving the right way. And I think that's just the way people do things.
That's how humans organize themselves.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. I think you make a great point about the filtering of information. Like, what information are you getting? And that's going to inform the kind of thoughts that you have, because we have the thoughts that are right in front of that are written right in front of us.
Right.
And then
taking it one step deeper, like you were mentioning, Harmony, then what are the emotional and the physical feelings that arise as a result of our thoughts and the information that's coming in? That's what, and yoga practice, I think that's one thing that we're learning, is to try to feel what those feelings are, emotions, physical sensations, what are all these things, and then how are they influencing our behavior? And I think that the more and more time we spend online, the less and less connected we are to our bodies and each other. So I think the past 2 years were like this weird perfect storm, weird catastrophic storm, where we are getting more and more disconnected, most of us, from our bodies and from each other. And so that only amplifies the disconnection more broadly across society.
Can you talk more about your sense of sympathy and being and wanting to be more towards the center? Like, how do you mean that? And what kind of thoughts are you referring to?
I was speaking about how come my blinders were kind of taken off. I think, we were talking about sort of these tribal identities, right? I think we all have a tendency to hold on to these tribal identities. And for some time, I was holding on to this vision of myself as a progressive. And then over the last 2 years, I have seen that, hey, like, you know, those other people in my tribe are behaving in ways that I don't really see as very rational. So I'll just use, my goodness, I'm going to be labeled an anti-masker now, you know, but okay, I'll just use masks as an example.
Yeah.
So when we didn't know the science, or the science wasn't clear, let's say, about whether to use masks or not at the beginning, we thought, okay, well, let's veer on the side of caution. Let's use the masks. Let's use them, you know. Okay, great. Let's use them. And then the vaccines came out. Everybody who wants the vaccine can get one. And somehow still, it's been a year plus into the pandemic. And those on the left are still saying, wear your mask, wear your mask, wear your mask.
Right.
Data is coming out that's saying actually cloth masks don't work very well, particularly for children. Like the WHO doesn't even recommend masking kids, you know, under, I think, 6 or something. Masking in schools is something that's like only happening in a couple countries in the entire world. And somehow people on the progressive left are thinking what, like that every other country in the world wants to kill their kids? Like, it's not like these things like they don't make sense.
Right.
Like, they don't make sense. And so I'm watching this happen, and I'm like, I don't think I'm the one that's crazy. So what's going on? You know, what's going on?
Yeah.
And so then I started getting my information from different sources, you know, respectable sources, doctors and stuff, but people who are from reputable institutions, but that are circumventing the traditional media outlets and putting stuff out there on their own via podcast or Substack or whatever.
TikTok, yeah.
Or Twitter, you know. Social media is also a gift, you know, it can be. A gift and a curse as well. But yeah, I started to have a more complete, I think, picture of the information, and started to see that, hey, maybe people on the right who think something different from me aren't just, you know, without consideration, just wrong or crazy or, you know, off the wall. Now, that being said, that exists as well on the right, right? The extremes exist on both poles. And unfortunately, because we spend so much time online, the extremes tend to guide the conversation. But in reality, I think there is this huge group of people that exists between the extremes that are just trying to figure it out and just trying to live life.
Yeah.
Like, you know, like just trying to live life. And it goes back to yoga practice. Like most yoga practitioners are just trying to practice yoga and get on with their day. They do not care if they pronounce the thing correctly. They don't care if they're, you know, getting into Supta Komasana. Like, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You're just trying to practice. You're trying to feel better, and you're trying to get on with the other responsibilities you have to attend to throughout the day.
Yeah. That's such a like refreshing perspective, because I think it's so true, especially, you know, when you have family or like another job that isn't revolving around yoga, or, you know, you realize like this practice is supposed to help my life. It's supposed to give me energy to do the other things. Yeah. It's supposed to make me more really patient with my kids and not like cranky at 4 p.m.
Yeah, exactly. And this is like a huge, it's very strange that this isn't the perspective with which most Ashtanga Yoga teachers teach. Or maybe it is, but again, publicly we kind of hold to this like other image. I don't know. Maybe, I feel like the reality on the ground is that most people are trying, most teachers even perhaps, are trying to just, you know, give their students some tools so that they can live better.
I really appreciate that you say that, because I'm often prone to hyperbole and superlatives, and I'll say, everyone's doing this, but statistically, it's really difficult to be sure of what anyone is doing. So I really appreciate that you say that. Another thing that I thought that you mentioned in your bio that I thought was fascinating was this quote that we don't hear a lot about the practical lens through which most Indians or Indian Americans view yoga. And I wonder if you could talk about that at all.
Yeah. Okay. So, the first time I went to Mysore was in 2010. Actually, the first and only time I went to Mysore was in 2010. And so, of course, I'm from India. So I was like trying to figure out where to stay. And my dad happened to know somebody in Mysore. And he was like, oh, yeah. So my daughter or something, his niece or something, my dad's friend, some relation.
Some relative.
Yeah, some friend's relative, younger female relative, was living in Mysore in a flat, and I was like, "Oh, cool! So can I just like stay with her?" And so it was like she was in this flat with a couple other girls, and I just stayed with them. So I was staying with local Indians, maybe like a 10-15 minute walk from the Shala. This was when the Shala was. Wow. Shala was
in Gokulam.
In Gokulam.
That's a great find.
Yeah, it was super cool. Yeah. But it was, and I'm so glad because it was not with like all the Western yogis. It was a little bit away, and it was with the locals. And I remember them like being like, "Oh, so why are you here and stuff?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm here to practice yoga." And they were just like, "Really? Like you came all the way to India to like just like practice yoga?" I was like, "Yeah, this is what people do." And they were like shocked. They were like, "We go to the gym. Like it's not a big deal. Yoga," I would have to say, for the vast majority of Indian people, yoga is really not a big deal. They do like some morning stretches, usually with somebody on the TV guiding them. Yeah. And that's it. And then they'll maybe, if they have a puja room or something, they'll do some chanting. They do some, some prayer, and that's their yoga, and then they're done. And this thing of like, we just do like this 90-minute practice, pranayama afterward, meditation 2 hours a day, and then what? Like, what's the rest of your life? Like that is a monk's life, that is a monk's life. And I think the vast majority of Indian folks are not living a monk's life. They're living their regular lives. And it kind of goes back to the cultural appropriation thing too. Like, most Indian people, if we're trying to be like, I don't know if we're trying to be authentic to Indian culture. I think, it's interesting, and maybe this is a bit of a tangent, but for me personally, when people ask me if like, oh, do you think that's appropriative, or you think that it's like gives you an icky feeling? The only thing that gives me an icky feeling in terms of cultural appropriation is when someone is trying to be something that they're not. That is what gives me that icky feeling. When someone is not living authentically, when someone's like taking on a name or like an identity, kind of like putting it on like clothing, and then walking, like being this other person outside the yoga shala, and then walking into the yoga shala with the beads and the incense and the murtis and everything, and then starting to speak in an Indian accent. Like, what is that about? That is so strange,
That's pretty weird, yeah.
But if you just walk into the yoga shala and you're Harmony, and you've spent decades visiting India, and so, whatever, like, and you're just yourself and you're doing your best, I don't find that to be cultural appropriation. No.
Yeah, but Harmony does say the same thing about me when I put on a yarmulke. Just like, Jesus Christ, man.
I've never seen you put on a yarmulke.
I have one upstairs, and it's not a yarmulke, goddammit. It's a yarmulke.
You're saying it wrong, Harmony.
I know. Say everything wrong. I'm so self-conscious about pronunciation.
But at the same time, I think, any kind of identity, and I feel this particularly in an acute way, given that that I traveled so much as a kid, and I struggled to find a sense of place, is that any kind of identity is appropriated. If I say that I'm going to be part of a punk community, if I'm going to be a part of an Ashtanga community, if I'm going to be part of the Jewish community, it's because I'm choosing to put it on. Because
we all do that. We have these little selves that we have all these little selves that live inside of us, and so we choose which group of people gets to see. That's just part of being human.
And it's interesting. Like you bring up, like spending that time in India and being educated, by Indian people in India, about Indian philosophy or yoga, you're going to kind of take on some of those qualities, some of those, some of that juice, some of that essence, and it's the same like when you go to school in America, you take on some of those qualities of your teachers and how they're educating you. And I think, they say that our personalities, or we're most like the 5 people that we spend the most time with.
Right.
And so it's interesting because when you kind of look around, the people that you're spending the time with, we have mirror neurons. We start to act like them and speak like them and become like them. And they're doing the same with us. And so we're having that that experience sort of creating that little pod or creating that little culture. And I think it's just a part of being human, right? That we tend to do that when we're in that place of connecting to whatever group it is or whatever group of people we're connected to. But I love that you say, that it has to also be authentic, right?
Right. And I think that's for me, it's about the integration. So if you've spent this time in a culture that's perhaps different from the one you were born into, if you spend enough time there that it's really gotten integrated, into your sense of self, into your way of being, then yes, it doesn't feel forced. The issue is when it does feel forced, and then you're sort
contrived,
of, and then contrived, and then also the second piece or another piece, which is that on top of that, if you're using that as a marketing tool to bring in the big bucks, then that becomes an issue. That's like the Nigerian food truck run by white people, whatever.
Or you're taking,
that's the big,
I think often
example.
I think often too, even of the mindfulness movement in the States, right? That basically took everything from Buddhist philosophy or even yoga philosophy, like Indian philosophy, and cribbed it all and
then
turned it into mindfulness, and now everyone practices mindfulness, and mindfulness is okay. But really, this is just Buddhism repackaged.
Buddhism that they got for free.
I mean, maybe they paid for it, but still, it's me, that's kind of cultural appropriation in a weird way that hasn't really been called out so much or brought to the forefront, because now we just all accept, there's this thing called mindfulness, and it's actually Buddhism.
To be fair, I mean, that's John Kabat-Zinn, who is a sincere practitioner of Goenkaji Vipassana, trying to sell it to...
I don't think he was a Goenkaji
Yes, he was. He's trying to sell it to Boston hospitals.
Yeah.
And there's a way that you can market something that is successful.
And
not using Sanskrit.
No, and that's interesting too, right? How to how to make things accessible for people that are afraid of the foreign.
I actually don't think there's something inherently wrong with that. Sometimes we have to strip things down quite a bit to make them accessible, and you never know when somebody or why somebody lands on something. And if it is accessible enough for them in that moment, they may say, hey, I'm doing these postures called triangle and side angle and wheel, and I feel really good after I do this. So what is this actually? And they go, oh, it's not just stretching, it's yoga. Oh, what is yoga? Let me go take a yoga class. Oh, what is this yoga? Oh, this is something called the primary series. Where did that come from? Oh, this is Ashtanga Yoga. Oh, I mean, it just goes it can go like that.
Yeah, and totally.
What's wrong with that? I mean, there are things that are wrong with, there are also these beautiful opportunities for deepening.
Yeah, and I think that's also that's how I really started practicing yoga asana was like that way, right? It wasn't going to Sanskrit counted class. It was like a very easy
gateway drug.
Modern kind of class, I guess. North Americanized.
Can we ask you how this happened to you? That you're a professional actor coming out of Northwestern, you're doing tour work, and then you go to California for the weather, and now you're a professional yoga teacher. How did it land for you?
it's bizarre. I mean, I started practicing Ashtanga Yoga when I was in Chicago, and then I came to LA. And as every actress in LA does, I started taking yoga teacher training.
Yeah.
It's a cultural normative behavior is what we're talking about.
Yeah. And so that was like in 2009. And I kind of, did both for a while. I was practicing, I was pursuing my career in acting, I was teaching a little bit. And then a few years in, I started, the yoga practice gives us this ability, I think, to tune into what's really going on, and these little seeds, kicks from within, as is said in some traditions, these little, just like little sensations our body gives us, the little thoughts that come up, and we start to become aware of them. And I was starting to notice that every time, like, my agent would call me, I would like not want to pick up the phone, or
wow.
I would, like, I would like not want to do it. Mm-hmm. And so at some point I was like, maybe I should listen to that. Maybe this isn't working for me anymore. This trying to pursue both. And so then I was at a fork in the road, and I chose yoga, and I'm really happy that I did, because I know I made the right choice for myself in that moment, because I didn't have regret about letting that side go, even though the arts were a huge part of my life for a really, really, really long time. Yeah. But I let it go, and I didn't feel bad about it. And I don't remember exactly what year that was. I think it was after I got married, maybe in 2014 or something like that. And then by 2015, my shala was open. So it just happened like very quickly after I made the decision. I felt very clear on my path forward. I felt very clear about the type of space I wanted to create, and I had the means to do it. And so I just did it.
Wow.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And you talked about a relationship with Manju and Nancy Gogoff. Were they part of informing your way of teaching, or was there?
Oh yeah.
Who was teaching you? Yeah.
So Manju has been my main teacher. Manju I met in Chicago, actually, and then he travels a lot. His home base is actually in Southern California, in San Diego area, but he travels a lot.
Encinitas.
Yeah. So I would see him in Chicago whenever he would come, and then I would try to catch him somewhere in the world, like once or twice a year.
Was that at Suda's place in Chicago?
Yeah, it was at Suda's place. Yeah,
exactly. And you yoga center. Yeah.
You guys have the same.
Yeah.
He is my root guru.
Root guru.
Suda,
cool.
Suda is my root guru.
Really cool.
Yeah,
that's amazing.
Yeah, I don't know him well, but he seems like a really nice guy.
He doesn't talk. So if he talked, you'd get to know him better.
What was it about Manju that, like, it sounds like you had like an immediate connection to him?
We did. Yes, he was like my yoga dad from the beginning. Yeah, or maybe more like my yoga grandpa. I don't know. He calls me his daughter. He called me. I haven't seen him in many years, actually. Since I have my own kids, it's like become very difficult to travel anywhere. But yeah, I just it was like a sort of instant bond that I think mostly, it sounds silly. It's not silly. It sounds simple, but it was because he was happy. It's because he had a smile on his face, and he laughed while he was teaching. Yeah. And yoga was fun. It was fun, and he taught in a way that was super liberated. Like he didn't hold people back. He, if I would like ask him, can I do more? He'd be like, yeah. Like, do more. Like, what? Why are you asking me? Do more, What do you want to do? Go look at that poster. Those are the asanas coming up. Do them,
Yeah. Yep.
He was like, do them. And his adjustments are amazing. He's like this little tiny man. He's shorter than me, but he has the strength of a lion. It's incredible. But yeah, more than anything, it was that, and his humility. And as I got more serious about the practice, I started taking trainings with him, and I just really appreciated his approach. When people asked him what makes a good yoga teacher, he would say, don't go to anybody's yoga class that doesn't smile. If the teacher doesn't smile, don't go to their class. And that humility is the most important quality that a yoga teacher can have. And so I was like, yes, these are the things that I believe in. These are the things I want to emulate. And so yeah, I was very, very, very fortunate to find him early on. I imagine that if I had started, happened to come across a different teacher early on, and could have gone a different path. But I'm very, very fortunate. Yeah. And that was the energy with which I wanted to teach. And when I started teaching in LA, I was apprenticing with many different teachers, all of whom informed the way I teach now, but Manju more than anything. And I didn't really see a place in LA that held to that ethos so clearly. And I wanted to create that. And I also wanted to create a space that was accessible financially, because I just felt like Ashtanga Yoga was becoming increasingly elitist. I still feel that way. Perhaps, I don't know, perhaps things are changing, but I do feel that the practice can be pretty elitist and pretty exclusive in terms of who can afford to do it.
I would object to the word increasingly, given that it started out so elitist.
But no, not originally. Originally, I don't think so. Originally, I don't think so. That back in the day in Mysore, I imagine, when you're teaching the locals, like, well, they can't afford to. Maybe perhaps once the Western students coming in, yes, I imagine.
For anyone to travel, anyone with the means to travel to India for 3 months in the first place,
absolutely, but
is extraordinarily privileged.
But that, I agree with you, and I don't see that as the beginning of Ashtanga Yoga. That's not the beginning of Ashtanga Yoga. That is when Ashtanga Yoga began to get popular. And by Ashtanga Yoga, I mean like these sequences that we learn, the methodology of practice, From my understanding, what Manju has told me, we're like working on this sequence way before any Westerners showed up. So at that time, you just teach to whoever is there. And,
I mean, the videos of Iyengar doing Ashtanga Yoga in the 1930s. I mean, it's
exactly. Yeah, I mean, this is all happening way before, and I don't. Perhaps if you're talking about the caste system, maybe if you're opening it only to Brahmins or something, there's some elitism there for sure. But I do think that specifically the financial elitism came once the Westerners started coming, because then, yes, these privileged people are able to practice. And then I also feel like this is a weird, going back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of, what is the aim of practice? Are we practicing 5 hours a day, or are we practicing just enough so that we feel good for the rest of our day? There's this weird kind of elitism that happens when, if you're going and traveling every year to Mysore, that means for whatever reason you have the time, or however you get there, you have the time, the means, the resources to do that. And then you come back and you have become a teacher, and then you start teaching. If you don't have a life outside of going to Mysore every year, that is the perspective from which you're going to teach. And what qualifies you to teach an average student then? I don't understand that. That always really boggled my mind. Like, what qualifies you to teach a mother of 2 young children when your whole experience has been this other thing?
I agree with that completely. When I have encouraged young teachers to work, I've so much of their mentality is about, like in Mysore and Gokulam, the 4:30 a.m. class, and like teaching that kind of student. But I would say to them, like, you have to take a real hard look at the 4:30 p.m. class. Because that's your student base when you get home. Is overweight dads and moms screwing around, and
just want to have an hour away from their kids,
and watch the way that Saraswati and Sharat teach that group. That's and they're comfortable. They know them. Everyone's laughing. Everyone's gossiping the whole time. Think about that kind of teaching as being the norm, because that's really what it's like. Is you're teaching a group of people that all know you and speak your own language, and they all have lives, and this is like the 10% or the 5% of their life of that day.
Yeah, exactly. So this is why I get very confused as to why this is not the prevailing understanding in our community.
I think there's like a couple things like going on there with, like you say, that intense dedication. I mean, if you want to kind of follow that strict sort of focused progression through the asana, through the sequence, right? Where it's a very different approach than Manju saying, go for it. You want to do more, go do more, right? It's more like you have to do each of the asanas and like reach these little bench points or these gatekeeper postures and be able to bind and be able to like do all the things. I mean, even to do like the advanced sequences.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, unless you're incredibly physically gifted, like with hypermobility, flexibility, whatever, it's going to take you 2 hours of practice of asana every day to like put your body into the type of condition and shape that it needs to be in order to do those like crazy advanced asanas. And not just that, you're going to have to regulate your time you're going to bed, the time you're waking up, your diet. It is kind of the life of an ascetic where
it is. Yeah.
You know, it's like you're saying, it's not at all reasonable to ask your average person to do that.
I would say it's the life of an ascetic, and it totally makes sense if the goal in that specific mode of practice, if the goal is to achieve a certain type of aesthetic perfection in the asanas, even whether it's primary, secondary, or advanced series. There are ways of practicing intermediate and advanced, as I'm sure you know, that are not about aesthetic perfection, but are about the energetic benefits that one gets from practicing intermediate series and advanced series. Because I really do believe that there are really, really clear benefits in those postures, that are further along in primary series. So let's say like Kapotasana. If you're doing Kapotasana and your goal is to catch your heels, then maybe you need to warm up for 45 minutes before, I don't know. Maybe you do.
An hour and 45.
If your goal is to open the chest, find some nice sensation in the upper back, and get like a little jolt of energy, you don't need 45 minutes to do that. You can take a shape of Kapotasana that gives you all those benefits, and even third series. Like I have students who will never put their leg behind their head, but they've been practicing for a decade. So am I going to say, no, you can never get any benefit from third series? No, I'm going to say do the arm balances because they will give you the benefit, or do what's accessible.
Yeah.
And I think it's like my mind keeps going back to this, I guess, because we started the topic with culture, our conversation with cultural appropriation, but part of Indian culture is this sort of just like live your life. Like these are the dharma, dharma in a yogic context means something very specific, but in broader Hindu culture or Indian culture, the word dharma means like your responsibilities. Like what are the responsibilities in your life? And so, yes, like yoga practice should be just one thing you do so that you can take care of your responsibilities, whatever they may be, whether they be your children, your broader family. That is very big, in India, to take care of your broader family, your career, your community. Yeah, yoga practice should aid you in all these things. And I do wish that we could bring that perspective a little more into the public conversation as Ashtangis. And I do think there are more and more people doing that now, which is nice to see.
Yeah, and I like this distinction between the aesthetic practitioner versus the energetics of the practice, right? Because I think we get inundated with the aesthetic. Did I say that right?
Ascetic or aesthetic?
Aesthetic. Thank you.
Aesthetic.
Yeah, with the beauty, of the postures and the images of the beautiful postures and the beautiful people doing the postures.
Yes.
And then we think, well, it has to look like that. And I'm not doing it correctly if it doesn't look like that.
That's why our Shala has no, on our Shala website, we have no images. Like we have no
really?
images.
It's an intentional choice. Wow.
Yeah, it's very intentional choice. Now on our social media, we'll post like pictures of people practicing at the Shala and stuff, but it's usually, very a broad range of bodies. And even the videos that I have a little YouTube channel that was kind of like just happened by accident and it grew. But everything that I post is very intentionally including lots of different bodies practicing these shapes, because I think we really need to change the narrative about what these shapes look like on different bodies.
Yep.
Yes, I love that.
And I think as teachers, we need to take some responsibility for that. We need to take some responsibility for how we market ourselves and, and kind of promote this ideology that it has to look a certain way for it to be yoga.
Yeah. And I mean, if we're having like a super honest, frank conversation, there's also just some body types that are not going to fit into that classical, ideal kind of Ashtanga Yoga, image, or that Ashtanga Yoga sort of very strict, disciplined kind of, you have to bind Marityasana A even, right?
Yeah.
Like let alone Kurmasana or Supta Kurmasana or Tijibhasana or whatever.
You mentioned hating the word spiritual, which I so enjoy.
He doesn't like it either.
I can hate it. But I also hate the word classical for the same reason. Because if you look at the word classical, class, there's a set, and then ik is a set, and then classical is a set of sets. Really, all it fucking means is your favorite things. These are my favorite. This is my favorite classical. Like this is the stuff that I like, and I'm dictating what things should be in that group or not. That's all I'm saying. That's what classical means. And so when someone says this is a classical way of looking at a yoga posture, it means this is the way I like it.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
And shouldn't it instead be, as teachers, shouldn't our responsibility be to the student to present, hey, this is the shape of the posture. How do you like it? Like how do you like to make this shape? How does your body like to make this shape? How do you feel when you're in this shape?
In the agony.
I love that. That's such a good. That's such a good turnaround.
You can't make that shape anymore if you're in agony.
That's right. That's right.
Like, this kind of self-reflection, I think, is something that I really try to model for the students. I'm like you asked me. I think this was somewhere. You asked me like what. Maybe it was in our back and forth before we started this conversation, but like what makes you a normie? Like I had said that I'm kind of like this a normie, like masquerading as a yoga teacher.
You described yourself as a normie masquerading as a yoga teacher. Yeah. What does that mean?
This is why, because like I am not. I think sometimes people assume because I'm Indian, like I will be able to like quote the Upanishads to them or something, and I'm like so not. And I will never be able to do that, even though I've read the Upanishads many times. I've read the Gita, all these things, right? But I will never be able to just like recite them. It's not how my brain works. And also in terms of alignment, like I couldn't, an anatomy, like I couldn't tell you the bone. And like I can't tell you like do this with this muscle and whatever. And so often the way that I teach, when students ask me like, what should I be doing here? I teach through self-inquiry. Like, how does it feel? Do you have pain? When do you not have pain? How do you not have pain? And yes, I've accumulated some tips and tricks and techniques over my time that I've been practicing, and I'm happy to share those with you. So here they are. And now you figure out how to heal yourself. You figure out the alignment that really works with your body. You figure out how to access this posture, and I'm here to help, and my hands are here to help you. But ultimately, this is your journey.
Yeah, I love that. It's so empowering. It's so much about what yoga is, right? Creating independence, giving the student back to themselves.
Autonomy.
Helping them be autonomous over what they're doing.
If you're not creating independence, you're creating dependence.
Yes, and I think that Ashtanga, this way that many of us have practiced, does create dependence. It creates dependence on a teacher, and as we've seen over the last few years of, many things come to light, it creates a kind of a perverted power dynamic in which lots of harmful things can occur.
Yeah.
And so we want to,
abuses.
I think we're now in a place where we can really consciously move in a different direction.
Yeah, I love that. I feel like women are leading the way in this.
Yes, absolutely. And I think, it's time. It's time for us to, talk about, Harmony, you're a mother. Biologically, women experience so many complex changes within the body.
Totally.
And so to be a female practitioner over the course of even a few years, even if if you're not getting pregnant, whatever, let's just leave that away for a second. Just as a woman going through the regular hormonal cycles.
Exactly.
That the practice cannot remain the same
exactly
every day or every week or every month. And then especially as you get pregnant, you really see that now, like, oh, okay, things are changing. And then you give birth, and then whoa, things are really different now. And I have this whole other being that's now existing outside my body. So how am I going to practice yoga in a way that I can also be present for this other being?
Yeah,
it's a lot. And so I think women, because of these changes, are a little more attuned to sort of this, perhaps an ethos of non-rigidity, allowing the practice to be more fluid. And so it does make sense to me that women are the ones leading this new path forward.
I wonder if you could talk more about this phrase that you used, and you wrote about it extensively, the motherhood penalty. And I think you've made an effort to reframe that penalty into a blessing.
Into a positive.
It's a positive. I just wrote a piece about this in Yoga Journal. Just published this piece I wrote in anticipation of Mother's Day, which is this weekend.
Yeah.
Happy Mother's Day.
Happy Mother's Day, moms.
The motherhood penalty. I think most of us are familiar with the wage gap, this like gendered wage gap that we hear a lot about. But I think what maybe some people don't know or may not know is that what's now understood to be actually going on is that women tend to take time off work when they become mothers, when their kids are younger, and either they choose not to go back into the workforce at all, or when they go back, they're now having to start all over again, and their income doesn't stay at the place where it was before they took the time off. If anything, maybe it's gone down, or whereas men typically, even if they're fathers, tend to stay in the workforce, and so their wages continue to increase. And I experienced this at the Yoga Shala as well. Like, this is what I called the motherhood penalty in that article, is that now, though I continue to teach, not even though I have 2 kids, I took maternity leave after each birth, but then I went back. I do have this experience where I'm not at the Shala as much as I was before. I'm not teaching as many hours. I have to leave early sometimes. I have to come late sometimes. I have to not show up sometimes because our childcare, can't come in or whatever. There's all these things that can happen. And I have to get the kids ready for school in the morning, all these things. Like, I have other responsibilities. So the Shala no longer gets my undivided attention in the way that it did before I became a mother. And yes, I'm sure that I've paid the penalty. I'm sure that there is a certain type of student who wants undivided attention who is not going to come to my Shala. And yet I feel that my experience as a mother, my understanding of what it means to live and love is so profoundly different than when it was before I became a parent. I don't like the word spiritual. You're right, Russell. But if we're going to adopt it just for the sake of this specific conversation, if anything in my life was a spiritual experience, it would be motherhood.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I honestly can't say that it's the yoga practice, it's motherhood.
Yeah.
And so I am bringing now to the Shala this felt sense of love and connection and sort of, I don't know if you experienced this when you became a mom, Harmony, like this kind of warped sense of time, because you see your children and your parents and like the cycle of life and death. I don't know. It's sort of wild, you know.
Yeah.
These are the things we talk about in yoga philosophy, but I didn't have any sort of understanding in a felt sense of them until I became a mom. And so I'm bringing all this to the Shala. And so for me, it's like definitely a blessing. It's a motherhood gift. And the students that are now coming to the Shala understand that I'm not going to be there in the same way I was before, but I'm bringing a depth of understanding that I didn't before. And specifically, you know, for other mothers that are coming into practice, I feel that I can be there for them in a much different way, you know, in a way that they perhaps wouldn't get from another teacher.
Yeah, I love that. We need to, like, I think all these changes like that you're talking about, all these discriminations against women are so, I mean, they're so embedded in the culture that we don't even see them or recognize them anymore. And it's up to us as women to change it, because the thing that drives me crazy more than anything is that half the time it's the women not supporting the women that is creating the problem. Yeah. And it's perpetuating these discriminations. And that's not helping anyone. And it's like, we need to support each other in being mothers. We need to celebrate each other in, you know, taking time to be with our kids when they need us. We need to lift each other up and, you know, be a part of these communities where, you know, women are leading them and, you know, not to feel like something's being taken away from us as a woman if another woman is being celebrated or lifted up or, you know, is doing something wonderful, or also like needs to take time away for themselves to do other things.
And I think part of this is, as women, I think this is really hard for a lot of women, because I don't know something about our culture, but we tend towards like perfectionism. And I think there is something really, really powerful about allowing our vulnerability and our imperfections to be seen, even when it's uncomfortable. Like, you know, sometimes I come to the Shala in a harried state because like the morning has been a shit show. Because that's just what happens with two kids. Sometimes the morning is a shit show and I'm screaming in the car on my way to the Shala. Like, this is a yogi. But that's the reality of life. And I come in and I like look a mess, and it's just, you know,
but the way it happened that morning.
My life in that moment. That is, you know, and I'm like having to leave and go into our little like changing closet to pump. I mean, this is just like to allow folks to see when things are not going perfectly. I think that's actually a form of leadership. And it's really necessary for us to be able to get to this place where we can support each other. If we're trying to be perfect all the time and put on a front, then we really can't get anywhere.
You use this phrase that I think use the lean in phrase. It's not possible to lean in sometimes. And I remembered living in San Francisco.
You know what happens? You know what happens when you lean in? You fall. Like,
when I was living in San Francisco, Sheryl Sandberg's book came out, Lean In. Everyone was talking about it. And then her husband died, just out of the blue.
Talk about vulnerability, imperfection.
And a year later, she said, you know, actually, it's I misjudged, and it is actually really difficult to lean in. When
you don't have a lot of other supports in place.
You need a lot of support.
And she has hundreds of millions of dollars of support, and she was still a struggle.
Well, yes, because, you know, we have this illusion that money is somehow going to solve all our problems. But you can have all the help in the world, but the emotional support is this. You can't buy that. You can't buy emotional support. And when you're raising children, you don't just need help. You folding the laundry. You need emotional support. You know, you need to feel like you're part of a village, a part of a tribe that's going to hold you when you fall, because there are going to be times when you fall. I mean, I have to say, motherhood is like a mirror. Like it just exposes all of one's flaws. I don't know if you feel that way. I feel that way. It's when it's 3 a.m. in the morning and your baby won't fall asleep and you want to like throw something out the window, you really get to know yourself. You get to know yourself.
Yeah, the darkest part.
What we're also trying to do in yoga practices, know ourselves. Not hide from those really dark places, because they exist in all of us. Those dark places exist. And so can we bring them to light? Can we love them? Can we love those really dark places? I don't know. It's hard. I'm working on it.
Yeah, I know. I always say to people, I'm not sure it's a very positive statement, but it's like, if you want to feel like a failure every day of your life, just become a parent and you'll be reminded at like how much you have to work on.
Totally.
I'm really blessed with the child that we have, that we're raising. He's so tolerant of me. No matter how angry I get, he will still come back for more cuddles and just like forgive me my trespasses. And he keeps coming back. I was like, this is really the kind of kid that I needed. Because if he was a kid like me that holds grudges, it would be a nightmare.
Kids really have an amazing capacity to forgive. I feel like we can learn a lot from our children. I learn a lot from my children. They really are incredible.
Yeah, they're like little teachers, aren't they?
They sure are. Yeah.
And it's a beautiful thing too. One day Jedi and I Russell was away on some trip and it was just me and Jediah for like 10 days, and so I was like doing all the things, and I like lost my mind one day and I just was like screaming at him, like going on a big rant about something. I don't even remember what it was. And then at the end I like calmed down and I said I'm sorry, I really lost my cool, but I just needed to vent, and like it just all came out. I'm so sorry it was at you, but you're here, and so it all came out on you. And he was like, oh, okay, that's okay, It's like he sort of, and then he was also having a bad day. So then he was like, but listen to what happened to me. And then he started screaming at me about his day. About like some kid that like was, doing all these things and driving him crazy all day. And, and he was like really yelling and like so much emotion. He was like crying, yelling, And then I said, see, it feels good to just like let it out sometimes, right? It's okay. Yeah. It's okay to just feel these things.
I don't think Patanjali recommends that, actually.
It was like scream therapy. But then like the next day it was so interesting because he said to me, Mom, it felt really good to just like let out my emotions yesterday. Thanks. And I was like, yeah, okay. Well,
that's awesome. Yeah. Like, that's modeling for your kid. And he's going to take that lesson with him.
Unintentional modeling. But yes.
Well, I think most modeling is unintentional.
Yes.
Like we have these kind of notions about, how we're behaving and how not in front of our kids or our students, like what are they going to pick up? But really what they pick up on are the moments between the moments.
So
when we're not thinking about what we're doing, when we're just being who we are.
Yeah.
That's
so true. Something that's a scary thought, isn't it?
Something that my mom said to me a lot when she was raising me and Dave was to think about that she would say, I'm trying to raise a man. I'm not just taking care of a boy. I'm trying to raise a kind of man that I want to see. And I I try to take that same approach with Jediah, and I think about like, I don't want him to, take advantage of his mother's care. I want him to not be entitled. I want him to have a big part of the house as far as taking care of the house and cleaning. I want him to see me cooking. I want to teach him how to cook. I was having a conversation with him yesterday about a woman's right to choose, a woman's right to have autonomy over her body, and I'm emotional about it. I think a lot of our listeners are also thinking about this, and it's emotional thinking about over 50% of American society being treated as a second-class citizen. And so we were talking about it. He said, "Well, Dad, I do think a husband should have, some say in, whether she can have an abortion or not." And I said, "Well, okay, well, let's talk about like the legality of that. So what does some say mean? Like, does some say that a judge can dictate, or how much information does a judge need before she can get an abortion?" He said, "Oh no, fuck that. It's just her right to choose, Dad. It's too complicated." I said, "Okay." And that's too much. It's just up to her. I said, "Okay." Well, another thing we were talking about was like, we're vegetarian, and we practice nonviolence, and it's like, how much how violent of an act is it? We started talking about miscarriages. We started talking about all of this stuff. And it's a great conversation to have with a 10-year-old, actually. And I would encourage people to have these conversations because it's super interesting. I just want to know if you had any thoughts on this. And it's a lot.
Like, dropped this in there in the last
yeah.
Let's talk about abortion.
Okay. Yeah. You're from Michigan. There are trigger laws in Michigan that are going to start to take forth. Maybe you can talk about that. You can talk about Hindutva and Indian conservatism. Choose a topic and jump in.
Well, it's complex. First of all, I think it's really, really awesome that you talk about this with your kids. I'm often really impressed by my kid. My oldest kid is only 4, so obviously I'm not talking to her about this yet. But
No.
I'm pretty impressed by when we do talk to her about things like we try to treat her like a little grown up.
Yeah.
Except, also acknowledge that she's 4. But I really actually do try to get her input on some stuff from time to time, and I'm consistently amazed by like her clear thinking, because I think sometimes we just put too, we're just too complex about stuff. And
100%.
Answers are more simple than we realize. But it's very interesting conflict, that you bring up about the nonviolence and how that relates to a fetus. And I don't have. The funny thing is that the abortion issue has become kind of like what we were talking about at the beginning of the conversation. It's become this red-blue issue.
Yeah.
Kind of you're on one side or you're on the other side, and there's no nuance. When in fact, I think, based on the polling that I've read, the vast majority of Americans are somewhere in the middle. They do not want they don't want to live in a world in which a woman can abort the child at any time, even like up till late term.
Right.
But they also understand that there are conditions in which a woman may not want to go through with the pregnancy. I think the vast majority of Americans actually are in the middle, which is interesting because we don't get that sense from the media. But in terms of the nonviolence, I think that, it's tricky because by being living beings, we have to kill. Like, there's just no getting around that, right?
Yeah.
Like, our life is taking other life. Even if we're vegetarian, it doesn't matter. Like, our life is taking other life. And I personally am not a vegetarian. I was for many years. And then it became my body began to tell me like, this isn't working anymore. And so I eat many things, and some of those things are animals, like dead animals. Like that's part of what I eat. And we know, we try to be very conscious about what we're eating. But anyway, that's a whole other topic. But I share that it's kind of as an insight into the fact that death is a part of life. Like we cannot escape all violence. We cannot escape all harm just because we want to. We exist. And so we will cause violence and we will cause harm. And historically speaking, from an anthropological perspective, and even beyond that, if we look at other species, mothers, human mothers and animal mothers, have always found ways to terminate pregnancies when they feel that that child is not going to survive or not going to have a great likelihood of survival. So there's this book, I don't know if you know it, by an author named Sarah Blaffer Hardy. I think that's how you pronounce her name, something like that. And she wrote a book called Mother Nature. It's basically a treatise on motherhood from like birds to mammals all the way to humans. And there are some striking commonalities. And one of them is that the mother and the child are not in this like synchronous, harmonious, like bond from the beginning. It's actually a bit of a fight. And any woman who's been pregnant knows this, that the body is fighting the fact that there's a foreign being inside of it, and at the same time recognizing that it has to nourish this foreign being. So the child is its own entity from the beginning. And the mother tends to take stock of its surroundings and make some kind of calculations about, is this child going to have a good likelihood of survival? And if not, there are a lot of animals who have ways of terminating their pregnancies. And as humans, we have done that. We have had the autonomy to terminate pregnancies when we feel that we need to. And of course, biologically speaking, that's kind of what some miscarriage, can be a way of the biology just kind of working itself out and saying this fetus does not have a high likelihood of survival. So the scariest thing to me about, the potential for abortion now to be, illegal across the country or be criminalized is like, we are taking away a fundamental autonomy that women have had forever. And the thing is, though, we're not actually taking it away. We're just saying you have to go underground. That's what we're saying. You have
because
to go
the
underground.
numbers
and that's,
of abortions will stay the same.
And that's so dangerous.
That's so dangerous. And
that's saying that I don't give a shit about women's lives. That's what that says.
Yeah, it is. And it's what we were talking about earlier in terms of how do we actually create behavioral change? If we want less abortions, which actually I can't speak with authority or about like what the rate of abortions has been. I was going to say that I think they've gone down, but I don't actually know.
The rate of abortions, whether they're criminalized or legal, stay the same per capita historically.
Yeah, that I understand, but I'm wondering, like,
over history.
For example, teenage pregnancy has gone down significantly over the last 20 years. Right. I was wondering, if abortion has followed that path. I don't actually know. But what I was saying is that if there are people in our society who believe that abortion is wrong and they would like to discourage women from aborting their fetuses, then behavioral change comes about by offering other alternatives, by making sure that woman, if she is on the precipice, if she's not sure, I don't know if I have the resources to raise this child, I don't know if I have the support I need to raise this child, then how can we offer amply those resources and that support?
Totally.
That's the way to try to get that woman to not abort that child, not by saying you're wrong and you're bad. Don't do it.
Slut shaming.
It just doesn't work. It's just ineffective. It's just ineffective.
Yeah, because it's not a solution. It's not solution oriented. It's not solving any problems. It's just saying don't do that. It's not giving any, as you say, better things to do. And it's like when you're raising children, right? You just say, no, don't do that. Yeah. I mean, the kid's just going to go right back and do it, or like, be like, well, and you're like, come do this with me, like redirect.
Exactly.
Redirection.
Yeah. And, it brings me back to like, I always say this to Russell about, American culture in particular, because in Canada, I didn't get it because I worked for myself. So, but if you work for a company, you get a year's worth of maternity leave.
Yeah.
And I know, and that can also be like 6, you can split that up even between the mother and the father.
Right.
So, but as a family, you would get, or 2 mothers or 2 fathers, you would get a year together. And I always think it's just such a discrimination against women and against mothers in particular, that you only get 6 weeks worth of maternity leave. I'm like, a baby's not even 3 months old. Like, oh my gosh, they're so small.
It's an indictment.
It's pretty appalling how little support. Yeah.
Yeah. And so again, it goes back to that support, right? Like, let's value women, let's value mothers, and create the kind of society, the kind of culture where we're supporting them, whether it's financially, whether it's through cultural norms, whatever, women need to be mothers, because it's such an important job. And, I know in India it's valued so much. Like when you become a mother in India, it's like your status in society like skyrockets to like number 1, It's like,
I don't know, Harmony. That may be a very idealized vision of India that you have. I don't know. India is also a pretty patriarchal society.
It is truly.
And the mothers, my perception or what I've seen is that yes, the mothers rule the roost at home. The outside is still often the men that are leading the way. But those things are changing too.
Yeah, I mean, not so much as far as maybe like actually like having like status that way. But I know for me, when I was there before I was a mother, always it was I was treated very differently. I mean, also being a foreigner with blonde hair, basically people thought I was just a prostitute. So that was sort of the main energy directed towards me. Yeah. But as soon as I had my son in India, it was like, oh my gosh, you're a mother. We're going to, watch out for you. We're going to take care of your son. We're going to make sure everything's,
because you did what you're supposed to do.
Yes,
you went and had a family. That's what I'm talking about. Indian culture. You had the family. Okay, sure, you practice yoga, whatever. But okay, now you actually did what Indian culture wants you to do, which is have a family.
Yeah, that's it's also such a like. I mean, we could go on and on with this, right? Because that must be also like a bit of a burden too for women in India to have that dharma or have that. Expectation put on them, because not all Indian women are going to want to have children or can have children, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
it's complex.
Yeah.
I think,
I do have to hop off pretty soon.
Yes, I know.
My baby is going to be calling for me.
Well,
we should probably call it there.
And we're so happy to have you join us, and thank you so much. And tell everyone where they can find you in LA, because I think you've outlasted all the other teachers and shalas in LA.
I think it's true, and I'm going to do a little happy dance about that.
I think you should.
I really feel very proud of our little shala community. It's pretty awesome. And so we are around. We're practicing in person in West LA. You can go to yogashalawest.com and find out more about us, or if you're here, come visit.
Yeah,
love to see you.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, one day when we make it to LA, we'll come visit with you.
Yeah. Love that.
Thanks so much for coming on today.
Don't stop. Don't